Hey everyone, welcome back to Apollo Art Analysis. This episode, we're going to be checking out a piece by the established 3D artist known as Huleeb. This episode, we're going to be talking about this grand sense of scale, this incredibly harsh texture, and we're also going to talk about how it feels to hit rock bottom. So let's jump right into it. So whenever you first see this work, you're met with a lone subject kind of standing here in this really large open sewer, right? It just floods the spatial composition. It certainly catches the eye in that initial introduction. And so in the realm of color, there's really two main colors here, right? You have this kind of greenish gray black, and then you have, of course, that white as well. There is a bit of accent with that kind of orangish red, but we'll go a bit deeper at that here in a second. So all in all, the mood is very dark. It's very dismal. It's, it's dirty, it's grimy, and it's certainly a very harsh aesthetic. And so what we also notice is kind of a use of rarity of color here, right? We talked about that accent and that kind of red-orange accent, and certainly catches the eye and brings us in this kind of right region of the spatial composition. Of course, this does accent our subject, and since it is the rarest color, our eye is just instantly drawn towards that area. So all very important when we're looking at this work. And so, we see a subject here, really no other people in the spatial composition, so quite alone here. Subject appears to be kind of looking down void. We don't have a view there. It kind of wonders, what is down there. Of course, it's the misty unknown. It is quite dark. It is quite unsettling in that kind of conveyance for sure. And so with this in mind, we see our subject is kind of framed in this kind of area of light here, right? This contrast, what we would call a light on dark contrast, certainly frames the subject as well as catches the eye, really intensifies the visual impact of form as well. So yeah, that's also very important when we're looking at this work because, all in all, that's really the only area the eye is drawn to. We have, of course, a bit of light in the ascendant region, but the only thing that really contrasts or juxtaposes itself in this canvas is going to be the placement, the positioning, and then, of course, the color and contrast of our subject. So we also see this immense sense of scale, right? This place just dwarfs us in its conveyance. It just goes off far past the eye can see, even down past the eye can see. So this grand scale, normally that conveys a sense of divinity, but when we have such a dark, a really gritty, a grimy and dirty aesthetic, the grand sense of scale is not going to feel divine. It's going to feel quite dark and dismal. So that's really important. Normally we look at scale and we think of divine and grand, but this does feel grand, but in a much darker way for sure. And so our subject appears to be standing in some type of sewers, right? We have this kind of grit and grime. The walls appear to be kind of wet, maybe some type of bacteria growing, very grimy, very kind of dark aesthetic that we talked about for sure. But the setting of a sewer, it immerses us within rock bottom. It is the place of the rats. It is the place of waste. It is not a pleasant area to be in. So this work really conveys and immerses us within that harsh aesthetic for sure. And so with this in mind, we see our subject has hit rock bottom, right? It's kind of standing within this fatal red light. It almost gets the heart racing like blood or fire. And then, of course, within such a dark and dirty aesthetic, does not convey a very pleasant experience, right? You're going to want to kind of run from this. You're not going to want to look at this for very long. Of course, the eye is caught by that area, but all in all, it is a very dark and very dismal aesthetic. And so with this in mind, we see our lone subject, right? And it is the individual kind of standing here. And I kind of saw this as a metaphor to how we experience suffering as an individual. Of course, when we feel pain, we feel so on an individual basis because we only see through our perspective. So, when the subject is in rock bottom alone in the sewers, there's so many different metaphors you can draw from that, whether you're going through a rough time in life, whether you feel like habits are kind of at a dead end. There's a lot of different things you can draw from here. And art like this isn't supposed to make you happy. It's not supposed to make you feel good. It's kind of meant to awaken, and it's meant to really kind of convey and share and even teach on the really darker aesthetics of the human experience. So we certainly see that for sure. Huleeb always does an amazing job in that respect. A 3D artist, really good stuff. I actually have another piece from this artist we're going to check out here in a second. But, like I said, we feel suffering from an individual basis. It's always from our perspective. And yet, despite our subject being at rock bottom, despite our subject just kind of standing in this blood red kind of fire-esque light, the light is still lit. The subject is still living. Might be standing in a very dark time, but the subject is still alive, still has 2 feet under him, and can still keep walking. So there is a bit of hope within that. It is such a dark and dismal aesthetic, and Huleeb does that dark aesthetic quite masterfully. I really love the kind of horror elements that the artist always brings in here. So we certainly see that for sure. But even at the end, the subject is still alive, so there is still a little bit of hope for our subject. So like I said, this is a piece from a digital rendering, so the artist does some 3D rendering within that incredibly realistic kind of virtually simulated medium, it allows you to sculpt and shape and assemble things in really a highly realistic manner. And of course, you have the incredibly realistic lighting. If you showed someone this, they might think it's from a movie or even a real place. So the digital rendering certainly conveys that kind of objective realism quite masterfully. If you're an artist who wants to get into the rendering, I'd really suggest that there's so many different kind of viabilities. It is quite a large pace of outwork as well, right? You can throw something together, and instead of drawing it, having to take a lot of time, you can create it quite quickly with the digital rendering. So a lot of different tools that it really provides there. We're going to check out one more piece from Huleeb, and then we're going to end it off for today. Just 1 year ago in October of 2021, I showcased that work on the left there. And here we are, about a year later, we have yet another work that kind of reminds of a similar tone, right? We have a lone subject really dwarfed by this dark scene, certainly an immense grand scale here. We see a light bit of contrast, which certainly frames the subject as well. We see that in both instances. And yeah, both aesthetics certainly convey a very dark theme. Both aesthetics are in the digital rendering as well, so it feels very, very realistic. Of course, in this piece, we have a little bit of rain. In this piece, we have kind of that grit and grime with the hand. But all in all, both of these works really show that grand sense of scale, that really dark aesthetic, a little bit of the cyberpunk genre on the left, a little bit of that kind of dystopian kind of grime on the right. Both really kind of frame the subject with that contrast as well. So all are really important when we're looking at this work. So I wanted to kind of compare that, just a year ago. 1 year later, here we are looking at another Huleeb, and just an amazing work coming from that original artist. But yeah, I hope y'all enjoyed. We talked about this incredible sense of the contrast, this kind of harsh aesthetic. We talked about the immense realism of the digital rendering, and we'd even compared it to some of Huleeb's original works as well. So I hope y'all enjoyed. Hope y'all learned something. If you did, go check out the original artist. Like I said, Huleeb always doing some really good stuff. My name is Apollo. This was Apollo Art Analysis, and I'll see y'all on the next episode. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you'd like to support our work directly, please check out our Apollo community tokens. Apollo Art Exchange is an ecosystem of art appreciation which elevates artists each and every day. Thanks for listening.